we already, there's no need to call.
Right. No. We're just recording. Oh, looks like it, huh? Marlon, we're going to ask each questioner to come to the microphone so that they, okay, so as opposed to trying to work with a phone. She's in Italy. I don't know about Courtney.
We don't know about Courtney.
We don't need it. Well, we have it. Ready? Okay. Good evening and welcome to all of you to Meridian Township. This will be a community conversation with the developers of the Village of Okemos project and our other members of our community. We have an agenda, introductions. I think if I could ask the developers who are kind of congregated on this side of the room to introduce themselves and take a moment to introduce yourselves so that everybody knows who we're talking with. And we will ask everyone to come to the podium, speaking to the microphone, because we are recording the session today.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Patrick Smith, and I'm the CEO of Westpac Communities. And we have been involved in the local area since 2013, so we're going on our 10th year. Over that period of time, I personally have invested about $500 million in the communities surrounding Okemos and in Okemos over the past decade. In 2018, the town manager, Chris Buck, came to us when we were building elevation apartments, which are just down the street off of Jolly Oak Road. We're in our fourth and final phase of that project, which is totaling 397 apartments. We have 353 units built to date, and also helped increase the walkability of that community by doing Joe's on Jolly, buying that property and then actually having Joe's come and acquire the property from us, and I think he's done a really good job with that. And the entire area in the area of the elevation apartments on Jolly Oak Road has been a real surprise and a pleasure to be involved with. During that time, Chris Buck came and saw us and asked us if we would be able to get involved with the redevelopment of the old town of Okemos. And we started in 2018 on that endeavor with the support of the township, especially the manager, stating that there were funds to help with dealing with the project because there was a serious amount of environmental remediation that was required from the dry cleaners that was there years ago, and some of the other issues that were to follow. And he was following on the heels of two failed projects, one from Douglas J. that started in 2016, and one in 2017 from Chris Elliott, who we acquired the property from at his bequest, at Chris's bequest. So I've owned the real estate on those two corners since 2017, 2018, and I finished acquiring the last piece of property as little as 11 months ago, which was on block number 1 of the 2 blocks. So I've had a long commitment of involvement, spent millions and millions of dollars on staying the course, and have whittled through some crazy, extraordinary issues with the site. One was the remediation, the environmental work, which we began in earnest through some grants that we were able to obtain from the state to tear down some of the blight that was there. So we demolished all the old buildings, and then we cleaned up the corner where the old dry cleaners was that had solvents that ran all the way over to Douglas J. So there's some plumes of smoke, and I can have Eric get into that in a little bit. In addition, this is not a greenfield site, which I wish it was. A greenfield site means city property ready to build on, and you basically go get a building permit, and if we could do that, we probably would have had this project built by now. However, with the improvement of Okemos Road, the new bridge, there were new road improvements that were required. The sewer line is antiquated, the water lines are antiquated, the power lines are a little bit untenable, the storm drainage isn't correct, so we're dealing with something that was probably over 100 years old and trying to put a lot of pieces together to make it happen. And we've worked comfortably with the township in doing that, and everybody's kind of worked together. But unfortunately, we've been through a longer journey than we'd ever hoped to have been through. Some of that was dealing with the timeframes to be able to find the capital to do those improvements. Some of it was due to our world of COVID. Some of it was due to the time it took us to remediate the property. Some of it was due to helping with the staging for the building of Okemos Road and the bridge. As you know, there was a lot of materials that were stored on our property for the last year while all of the improvements were being made. And then on top of those issues, we've been through a craziness in interest rates and a craziness in banking issues in the recent future, and we've stayed the course. So I just want to let you know that it's now 2023. I've been here for 5 years. I own the real estate. I put a lot of money into it. I don't like to let my money sit dormant. I would like to get this project finished as quickly as possible, and it's been a struggle to deal with the extenuating circumstances of all of the public improvements. Like I said, if this was a greenfield site, we'd be off to the races if we could figure out a way to fix the public improvements. And those improvements are not just for this site. They're for all the neighboring properties in terms of the power distribution, the water distribution, the sewer lines, the road improvements. Those don't just benefit this piece of property, they benefit the community at large. And that's what it was important for me to get my hands around so that the whole project would make sense for everyone. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric that can talk to you about what we call the extenuating or extraordinary circumstances with the project so that you can see with your own eyes what we've had to deal with over the last time period. So with that, I'm going to turn the mic over to Eric.
Good evening. Before I start, I think I'm going to introduce our team and have everybody kind of stand up. We got quite a few people here. It takes more than a village to rebuild a village. So in addition to Patrick Smith, who's at the helm, the developer, we have John Peckham. John is dealing with all of the entitlements, all the approvals, deals with all the engineering and so forth related to the site, both on-site and off-site, in order to allow for this project to proceed. We got Jonathan Branoff. Jonathan puts all of the financing together, works with all the lenders, and has probably the funnest job of all of us in dealing with all those numbers. We have Rockwood Shepherd over here and Cody Shepherd. They kind of a tag team duo. They deal with the vertical construction predominantly. And they've been at the helm of the elevation at Okemos Point project, all the phases, to make sure that those are getting constructed and ready for occupancy. And we're about to start phase 4 of that project here in a very short time frame. And let's see who else we got here. Henry, what is your title exactly? I just met Henry today.
Patrick is multi-state properties.
Awesome. So we have Patrick and Henry who came, and Jonathan, who came from California. That's where they're based out of. And they have a lot of active projects here in Michigan. So I just want to make sure and introduce everybody there. All right. So just to give everybody a framework where we're at, I believe everybody knows, but I don't like to assume. So some of this information will seem common knowledge to most of you, but you can see here south of West Grand River, we have in the village, the heart of the village, there's actually a total of 5 blocks that everybody refers to the village as. And we're only addressing 2 of those blocks in this redevelopment. There's an additional 2 blocks across the street on the other side of Okemos Road over here. And then there is a 5th block that is sitting here next to our block 2. And I'll have another drawing and it'll make it a lot easier for you to understand. So when we took this property over, there's a lot of functionally obsolete, blighted buildings, stagnant tax growth, and I would have to say actually negative tax growth. Because of the level of blight, environmental contamination, this was a village that was in a downward spiral. All of that did not attract many investors. So when a development in an area is thriving, there's always what we call spillover development, and none of that was occurring. Why would you want to invest next to all of this big, blighted, contaminated stuff? It's really a negative for the community. This shows our 2 blocks here much more clearly. The blocks and why I have this table here next to this, it was very complex to do what we called land assembly. So we have 4 parcels on that north block, block 1, and 7 on the south block, block 2. The other 2 blocks I was referring to across the street, and then this block over here. The Red Cedar River runs kind of, if you can follow my arrow, in this direction. What have we completed? Right now, as Pat had mentioned, just to kind of go over it, the Mark building, that's an old former bank building that's been abated with asbestos. All of them have been abated with asbestos, and then that was demolished. What you had here was the Ace Hardware store, as well as the bottom up on the corner. Again, all taken care of. The Tuba Museum, the old pharmacy, all have been removed. And then what's not shown in this corner, there was a former dry cleaner site. You can see a hole in the ground here when this picture was taken, along with a house that was located in this location with my arrow, and then the old pole barn that was part of the Ace Hardware storage. The only building that's remaining right now is this office building that's sitting here in this corner. This is the only building that was occupied at the time. We had a tenant in that building, and it was the only non-blighted building. So that building will be demolished right before us going to construction with the project. It's another view of the property showing all of the buildings removed, and you can actually see the construction staging for the bridge. And this really helped the Okemos Road Bridge get constructed much more quickly. And logistically, it was so close that we allowed them to use our property. And it just happened to work out really well that we had demolished all these buildings. So right now, the plan is for us to begin construction, vertical construction, that is, in spring, summer summer of 2024 and then complete the project in its entirety in both blocks in 2027. The investment right now is about $88 million. And I'm going to go through a couple of specifics on the next slides related to a $6.5 million environmental or brownfield work that we have to conduct, and about $4.3 million in infrastructure improvements that are public infrastructure improvements. I'll go in a little more detail on. This project will create better than 100 jobs. We've got about 30,000 square feet of commercial, office, and retail, and we'll be able to bring a lot of jobs to this village, and then the spinoff that will occur. So as you can see, this is a significant investment, major improvement to the downtown. It's going to be very transformative when you have a very dense mixed-use development like this. It's going to spur additional development in the area. It really will help the overall success of the village and the township. We have about 206 multifamily units that are in this development, and it will help the missing middle and workforce housing as well. Based on the targeted rents that we have here, that will be able to support everybody from your, worker that would be able to afford this. These are not high-end. These are not luxury apartments. High-quality build, targeting the market rate. So all its market rate housing and the additional retail and commercial will be placed there will add a lot of tax base and increase property taxes, not only on these properties, but it will help spin off and increase the taxable value of properties in the surrounding area. As Pat had mentioned, there were two previous projects proposed for this, and this is the farthest this project has, these blocks have ever come. Especially with the land assembly, which was very difficult, and all of the asbestos abatement and demolition, and at the start of the environmental remediation. One other thing I skipped over, which I need to mention. There's another parcel of property that is to the far west along the Red Cedar River. It is ultimately a part of this project from the standpoint that it is necessary for our stormwater management on the site. It also will control the stormwater for all of the roads in the village surrounding these properties. So it is assisting in that stormwater management. So what we're talking about, we've been talking with the DDA about in the township, is to integrate that stormwater management property into a pocket park. So to create an amenity for the village. Since it is along the Red Cedar River, that will be a nice amenity in that immediate area of the village. So how are we doing all this with all of these extraordinary costs that we have? So infrastructure alone, and I'm going to let the township, they're probably going to speak more specifically to this, but we have some grants that we received through the township. Those grants through the redevelopment fund. We also have DDA, or tax increment financing from the DDA. These are dollars, incremental increase in taxable value from our project alone. So whatever we build, whatever incremental taxes that are created will come back to us to pay for some of these extraordinary costs. Not all, but some. We're looking at a state of Michigan appropriation through the community project funding. We have made application for that numerous times with the township support. Township's been very good to work with and working with our state representatives to get some of this, and that'll help fund some of this work. And then the Ingham County Road Department. Okemos Road has to be completely reconstructed, including the signalization at Hamilton and Okemos Road. The road department has agreed to split that cost with us, essentially paying for the east half of Okemos Road, while we have to fund the west half and the signalization of Okemos Road. So this map illustrates everything that you see here in the color that has to be done, that involves sanitary, storm, water, the electric, we have to address there, the road work and all the road repairs. So everything is going to be rebuilt in the color that you see there. So that $4.3 million amount that we have to pay for is all going to be a public benefit. It's going to be a public improvement in the immediate downtown of this village. The environmental, what are we doing about that? We've been working very closely with Eagle on a number of grants and loans, and they have been very supportive of the project, and we have secured those funds. Eagle, actually, where that hole in the ground is currently, spent better than $750,000 removing the source contaminants of the dry cleaner site. There is still significant contamination left that we have to deal with, in order to make these properties safe for redevelopment. Brownfield Authority here in the township, along with Eagle, again, the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, supportive of what's another TIF plan, which is state tax increment revenues in order to make up for some of the remaining costs associated with the contamination that's there. And then project construction gap financing. Both of the programs that are listed there, the Revitalization and Placemaking Grant, as well as the Michigan Community Revitalization Program, grant and loans. We're in the process of making application to the state of Michigan. Both of those are through the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, and then ultimately approved by the Michigan Strategic Fund. Those are critical to the project's success and moving forward, and we're hopeful that MEDC and the Michigan Strategic Fund will support us and like the project. So on the environmental, to give you a sense of what we're dealing with, on the north block, this is from the old Clark gas station. If everybody remembers the station that was there, it was demolished a number of years ago. This is an old gasoline plume that's remaining in soil and in groundwater. And that is predominantly on this southwest quarter section of the north block. The Tuba Museum restaurant was right over here, and the old pharmacy is there. The existing building that I was talking about is in that location. The extent of the soil contamination that's currently in place, this is a direct result of that dry cleaner release that occurred many years ago. When we say source area removal, by demolishing the building, they were able to get access to where the contamination originated and the highest levels of contaminants. The residual contaminants still remain at unsafe levels and at levels that we have to deal with as a part of our development. The location of this plume here, which is related to soil, is from a number of gasoline releases. The old Bottoms Up location was a former gas station historically, way back when the village was an old village. The Ace Hardware had some gasoline as well and usage at that location, and there's releases from that. And then as far as groundwater, this is a coal-mingled plume. In other words, various types of contamination of different types. We have petroleum that's emanating from this location, and then we have chlorinated solvents, which is from the dry cleaner release, that have commingled into this one large plume off of this block. So all of this contamination, as well as dealing with the blight, is at about $6.5 million. Again, with the 4.3 in infrastructure and the 6.5 in the contamination, we have about $11 million in extraordinary costs. So just to give you kind of a feel what's going to come. This is block one, looking to the northwest. We have Okemos Road here and Hamilton Road on this side. This is block two. Again, similar view, but looking to the southwest with Hamilton here and Okemos Road. On both blocks, you have facing the Hamilton Avenue, reproducing the village feel. We have commercial, retail, restaurants facing the first floor there. And then same thing on block one that I showed you just a second ago, the hard corners as we call them, as well as all of the storefronts on Hamilton. So both blocks have that. This gives you some imagery as you're walking down the road on block one. This first one here would be walking down Hamilton. This would be walking down Okemos Road in the bottom right corner. In the upper left corner, this is again walking down Hamilton on block two and walking down Okemos Road. It kind of gives you a feel what it will look like if you're just passing by. And this is a nice image as you're walking to the north and looking over to the northwest. You've got block two sitting here in the corner to your left. As you make the turn, you can see the building on the north block. Again, this is where the Tuba Museum was located, and you can see the street and how everything will come together. Both blocks have parking structures. There are two-level parking structures. on both blocks. This is Block 1. Everything is tucked behind the buildings. So when you're on Okemos Road and you're on Hamilton Road, you will not see those. You're getting access on the Block 1, the north block, on Methodist and Ardmore. And on Block 2, you gain access on Clinton and Ardmore. And again, behind the buildings, you won't see them when you're on the street front. I get this question a lot, so we decided to put this in so you get an idea of the parking and what is going to be provided there. We have 196 total spaces on Block 1 and 181 spaces on Block 2. You can see we have a combination of dedicated private vehicle parking for the residents. We have public parking anytime, and then we have shared parking and overnight parking. And you can see the mix of the parking here at 377. And that's our overview. So we'll turn it over to the township. That'd be it.
I apologize, I've been instructed to wait for a minute until the cameras.
Different setup than normal.
So Amber, will you introduce yourself before you begin?
I absolutely will. Director Deal, ready? Okay. Good evening. My name is Amber Clark. I'm the Neighborhoods and Economic Development Director for Meridian Township. I started in this position in October, the end of September in 2020, and I was very excited to launch myself into the Village of Okemos project. I make jokes about it being a sitcom because it's an interesting situation every day, something new. But we as a township want to provide the public with an understanding of, considering how complicated it is, the layers of financing and what we have approved as a township and a community. There's a handout, there's some copies up here as well as over by the door. If you do not grab any for you to take as well for this copy, we'll have it online. As you see on our graphic, we have several different circles available showing the different funding buckets and how the township is associated with all of these. Every funding bucket that is in orange has been approved by that entity. That doesn't necessarily mean the funding has gone to the developer. As we all know, much of these are reimbursements, which means the developer has to pay for that in advance, and then the township will, or the other entity like Eagle, will reimburse the developer for those costs. So that is, the first bucket was approved by Eagle in 2018, and that is a combination $1 million loan, and there's $800,000 roughly left, considering that the developer just explained that they use a portion of that for the demolition of the site. What is in white around each of the, you'll see there are 3 buckets that have a white circle around. I want to indicate grant versus reimbursement. So grant is an allocation of funding that will be given to the developer for the project eligible costs. Reimbursement will require the developer to pay for those first and then to receive that back from the township or a separate entity. So 2018, the developer and the township was approved for an Eagle grant and loan. And we've had 5 extensions with Eagle's approval and special efforts made by executive team and Manager Walsh to receive that last extension because Eagle, of course, has very specific parameters. They provide funding for all of these similar projects across the state. So we have to continue to fight to make sure that we hold on to that funding bucket. It's very imperative for the developer to continue to hold on to that to pay for the remediation. 2022, the Township Board approved a $1.25 million grant out of the Meridian Redevelopment Fund for the improvements on the streets surrounding the development. That is an approval. No funding has been given to the developer as the project is not underway. It will be done through construction draws. So once the development is underway and those streets are being approved, if the township will grant them, the developer will submit receipts showing that these elements are paid for and under construction, and the township will pay for them at that time through the signing of a reimbursement agreement. Again, no funding from the MRF has been granted to the developer at this time. And then we have the 6.9 approved brownfield plan with the Meridian Township and Eagle to clean up the remaining contamination on site. This includes putting in a vapor mitigation system. As the developer let us all know, there is no full removal of the contamination. So the sources of contamination have been removed, but the ancillary contamination cannot be removed. So we'll have to use a system in order to keep those nasty vapors away from all of us in the public and all of those that would live in the area. Below, we have 2 funding buckets that are yet to be approved and secured. The one the developer mentioned is a $5 million grant plus a $4 million community and revitalization approval from MEDC. We are in the throes of that right now. The RAP Grant 2.0 opened May 1st of 2023, and we have until June 30th, 2023 to apply. The last bucket being the Community Projects Fund. It is a fund supported by Alyssa Slotkin from the Federal House Appropriations Committee. The township, working with the developers, submitted 3 grant applications to this Community Project Fund, but this is the first year Meridian Township's project was selected. So we have submitted the same project for 3 years to this fund based off the parameters Representative Slotkin's team let us know we would be eligible for, and notification of the award won't occur until December of this year. Our request is quite large, but I will explain that we are not guaranteed to receive the amount that we requested. So I did ask for quite a large sum in order to support infrastructure, and that funding would specifically go to the DDA, not the developer. So that would come to the township in order to support the infrastructure around the development as necessary. It's a total estimated $96 million redevelopment project, and as mentioned, redevelopment is more expensive as we are taking down and getting rid of what was existing and bringing back something new. And on our far right side, I gave us a good timeline of almost every single approval and step we've had. I try to condense it down to a Reader's Digest version. So in 2017, we began our discussion with the developer to revitalize the downtown, and we began working as a community on revamping our downtown development tax increment financing plan. So the update to that plan would allow for a developer to be reimbursed for infrastructure. In 2018, that plan was adopted, and so we have a new TIF plan that started base year 2018, and that goes to 2038. And Eagle approved the brownfield grant and loan, as you see in the first orange and white circles. 2019, the project was pending, and we went through our first request for extensions with Eagle to keep that grant and loan. 2022, I was hired. The project is still pending. We requested an additional extension of the grant and loan, and the developer requested a minor amendment to the approved MUPUD, in which it was approved. January 1, demolition of the site began. The township requested an additional extension from Eagle. The township submitted our first application for CPF, and we were not selected. The developer requested an amendment to the approved MUPUD, and it was approved. 2022, we have another amendment to the MUPUD. The developer requested the use of the redevelopment fund in this year as well, and we did approve the $1.25 million when the project starts to pay for the infrastructure. And we submitted our second CPF request, and we were not selected. Bringing us to this year, the developer requesting an additional amendment to the approved MUPUD, that was approved, and the township submitted our third CPF request, and we were selected, and we have until the end of this year to find out our allocation.
Thank you. So we now come to item 4 on our agenda, which calls for public questions and comments. And if you will allow me, I'd like to ask my fellow board members if at this point they have any burning questions or comments they need to make. Mr. Treasurer DeShane.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, thank you for coming from Santa Barbara for this meeting today. The community really wanted to hear from you, and we're glad you're here. And I got to say right off the bat, I find your plan to delay construction another year really disappointing. We were hoping you would come with a plan to get shovels in the ground this year and not another year. Disappointing because this board and the community has been working with you the past 5 years and done bent over backwards with grants and money and even working with our congressman to take care of infrastructure since 2018. You all remember the big ribbon cutting we had, and that was over 5 years ago. You produced a real slick video showing up the street view and how great it's going to be. So your public relations was great, but the construction and the actual plan to develop this just never has formulated. And probably 2019 is the most frustrating year because you had a chance then. You had a window. You had the TIF financing and plan that will get you $6 million. You had other monies available to you. You had the Eagle grant that cleaned up the facility, and nothing got done. And then we rolled over into 2020. We had COVID and all the issues there. Now we've got increased construction costs, interest rates. The board even raised the density and height limits for you. We created a potential
Intensity.
intensive change area for you. We essentially waived our rules to make it possible for you to do this. We allowed you to cut back commercial space by almost 2/3, from 32,000 to 10, 11,000. So we've been very generous in trying to work with you to make this happen. And yet, again, we're hearing from you another year, maybe May of 2024 before you have a shovel in the ground. My fear, honestly, is you're going to come back with some more excuses in a year. Interest rates, construction costs, more environmental problems, more whatever, because you've really had excuse after excuse after excuse with no development there on that site. And it's blight to us right now. It's a blight at the center of our community. And many people are here tonight because they're tired of that blight and they're tired of hearing stories about why you can't build. As for your previous investments, you've done a great job down there at the elevation. And I think that's a very profitable site for you. That's not the same as downtown Okemos. So I wish you'd put some of that $500 million here, downtown Okemos, as well as down there, because from this board member's point of view, we're not seeing much action there. We're seeing you asking for grant and loan and brownfield and TIF grants. We've given you all that, and still now another year away from construction, maybe. If you really can't develop it today the way it is, maybe it's time to sell the property and let another developer in, rather than stringing this community along again another year, stringing the board along another year, because we've been waiting now 5 years. And you just slept through 2019. You had a great window to start. 4 years later, we've had genuine barriers to it with COVID and increased costs and now increased interest rates. But you missed that window, and you may not get one as good. And I don't see much evidence that you're going to come back to us and say, we're ready to break ground and build this thing. Another year is really disappointing. But thank you nonetheless for being here. We're glad that you're here to hear our concerns and our frustration with this project.
Trustee Hendrickson.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. I appreciate what the treasurer's brought up, and I think that it's important. I mean, it's not as though, Mr. Smith, you came in here without eyes wide open, right? You knew that there was environmental contamination. You knew that there was improvements that were going to have to be made. And I think, this community has bent itself over backward to, help to find funding for for this in part. I mean, from what I'm calculating based on what Director Clark had put together, we're approaching about $26 million in money. Not all of it's from the township, right? Some of it are grant applications that we've supported with the state, and this community project from the federal government may turn out into quite a tidy sum as well. And so, the supervisor asked for, questions. What more could we do, right? What more could the community do to make this project come to be in a more timely fashion? A year is a year, but to some, it's, a year is a short amount of time and it may fly by. But, to us, it's our home, right? It's our downtown. And we drive by it every single day, and we're forced to look at empty lots, contaminated lots, blighted lots. And so I would ask you, what more would you have us do?
Other board members? Trustee Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Supervisor. My immediate concern is your first bucket of funding, the $1 million loan and the $800,000 grant from Eagle. Eagle has granted 5 extensions, and they will not grant any more extensions. And I understand this extension ends on October 31st of 2023. Could you tell us how you are going to affect the environmental work that needs to be done in order to qualify for that work by that deadline?
This is a direct question to
Yes.
the developers.
I have a couple of questions, so I don't know. Do we go one person by one person? I'm trying to remember them all.
It's fine.
Okay, you didn't have a question. Okay.
Just a comment.
Mr. Hendrickson had a question. Let's answer Mr. Hendrickson's question, if you will, and then our
Sure, that's
trustee.
the grants, and this is what more can the township do? Did I hear that right? Okay. So, no, we are very appreciative of everything that the township has done. The complexity of this project is that what the township has afforded us is about a $1.3 million grant and about a $4.6 million tax increment financing plan, okay? Tax increment financing is only created when our project is built. So I want to remind you that we're using our own tax dollars to repay ourselves for the village's public infrastructure, okay? And that $1.3 million is not a forgivable grant. It's actually a forgivable loan, and we're being required to use the tax increment financing to pay that back. So those are the local tax dollars that do not exist today and are only created once we build the project. And that's very important to remember. The state's portion of tax increment financing is to go for what the grant does not pay. And I'll kind of switch over to the grant question. So our Eagle grants have been getting extended because we've been applying for, as Amber has been explaining, 3 times to the state for those appropriation funds. We've also applied once before for the RAP program grant. And then the only program that has to trail is called the Community Revitalization Program Grant and Loan. We cannot apply for that until we secure or don't get the RAP grant. The dollar amount in the CRP grant and loan will be a backfiller to that. That's all state funds. So kind of to flip back, I'm going to go back and forth to what the township can do, continue supporting the project, because without your support, we won't get the state funds. This project, as was mentioned before, because of all of these extraordinary costs, which were not even known in 16 and 17, weren't really fully realized until the last couple of years. The millions of dollars that has been spent has discovered all of these extraordinary costs. So we didn't know what's in the ground. No improvements or upgrades to the township's infrastructure in this area. I don't know of any project of this scale or any project in the township where you're making a developer pay for all the public infrastructure. We've worked with the county road department. When we first started this, the county road department was going to pay for Okemos Road. Then they lost their funding and couldn't proceed to do that. So we were left holding the entire road cost at one point in time. Through the great efforts of John Peckham and working with the road department has stepped up and is appropriating half of that cost approximately, the east half of Okemos Road. So we have been continuing to get additional numbers and costs put upon our project. And I think it's very unfair to look at the developer and say, you haven't done enough, when they've purchased the property, incurred all the cost, have done significant amount of activities, including the blight removal. The property's not blighted, it's vacant. It's land. We completely cleared the blight that's there. And yes, it's contaminated, but the only way we can actually gain access is by getting the rest of the funds from the state to be able to complete the balance of the grant work. So what we did by working with the state of Michigan, Eagle, in the extension, is timed it with the RAP grant. So if we secure the RAP grant, which we'll know in the fall, so the application process ends in June, then once we secure that grant, from then, we will get another extension. And when we get that extension, then we will proceed with the CRP and finalizing all of the agreements with Michigan Economic Development Corporation and the Michigan Strategic Fund for those approvals. This is such a transformational project. We've been getting nothing but support from MEDC, all of our legislative bodies and representatives locally on this. And these are very tough projects to get complete. And I'd like to see another $88 million development go, but this is the only one I know about going in the immediate area, for Lansing. The closest one to this of this scale is the Red Cedar development, which was, $280 million. So this is a very impactful project to your community. A developer that took the time and money to acquire all of this land and spend millions isn't just going to let his money sit in the ground. They're going to proceed with a project. And this is how the sausage is made. We'll get there. And it takes time. And it's not uncommon for a project like this, especially with all the additional things that were thrown at us. With COVID, inflation, interest rates. We didn't make this up. Every project in this state, in the nation for the most part, but this state in particular, is dealing with these kinds of problems. We can't just ask people to pay more rent. Rents in Michigan are relatively set. There's a lot of other states in this country where you just increase the purchase price of a home, increase the rents on your multifamily, increase the rents on your square footage for your commercial. We can't do that here. We don't have that ability. So one of two things has got to happen. Costs got to go down, or rents and revenue goes up. And then the latter is not going to happen. So we're looking at the interest rates very carefully. Rates didn't move all that much. They moved up a little bit here recently. The trend is that it will be flat or move down. We're working hard, and we appreciate your support thus far. We want to continue to see your support so that we can get the state to participate in the rest of this project.
Okay. You got another question?
If I may, yeah. Would you say that your project is dependent on interest rates decreasing?
I can't answer that. Is it dependent on interest rates decreasing, Jonathan or Pat?
Not on a phased approach. So we've done the underwriting, and we feel solid that we can get this thing built in a phased approach. The rates right now have hurt. That's not been a fun year. It all happened in a spike, and a lot of things that transpired in this project, as Eric said, we didn't have complete understanding of the remediation of plumes, of contaminants that came along. And as those were discovered, when we actually finished the excavation and got rid of the actual contaminants on the property, and we had to deal with the remediation of the residual that we couldn't export, took a turn, and it took time. And if this was a greenfield site and it was developed and the township took the responsibility to give us a greenfield site, which they're trying to do through grants and loans. We're not asking you to go out and spend your money to do it. We're trying to figure out a way that we can use tax money from the state and the community to pay for $11 million worth of a mess. If I had a greenfield site, as I said at the beginning of this thing, we would be done and out of here and the buildings would be up. But that's not what this is. This is a transformational property with a huge mess of $11 million that's being thrown onto a project that should be, instead of $88 million, and as Amber said, $96 million because of the interest incurred and the other benefits, that should have been a $77 million project. In a typical gig, that's what this would be. And the other thing that happens is when we get these grants and loans, it's not dollar for dollar. We have to spend it first and we have to wait 18 years. So when you present value those dollars, they're only worth about 50 cents on the real dollar today to spend the money to fix the infrastructure. It's not dollar for dollar today. We can only extract 50% of that. So we're eating another $5 million worth of cost. So I paid $6 million for the property. I've got several other $1 million involved in plans. We're ready for permits. We're spending tax dollars right now paying for the property taxes on it while we're waiting. This is not an inexpensive venture. You know, I was brought to the party, and I think we've done everything we could as expeditiously as we could and as responsibly as we could, given all of the things that have been thrown at us over the last 3 years in terms of the curveballs. I don't like curveballs. I would be nothing more pleased than to have a bookend project to the elevation project, which is over $100 million asset at one end of Okemos, and this in the core of Okemos. That was my goal to set out to do it. And if you don't think I'm doing good enough job, buy it from me, or we'll find another developer. But there's not a lot of guys that have the tenacity and the stick-to-itiveness to get where we are today, given COVID, interest rates, recession looming, and all of the stuff that we found in the land. This is an awkward, rare situation that nobody understood how much it was going to cost at the beginning of it to pick it up. So, you know, I apologize that we didn't get it done in 19, but not really, because we did the best we could. Thank you.
I need to get to providing the public an opportunity to get their questions answered. So I will do this by asking members of the public to come to the microphone and pose your question. And I will start on this side of the room with this gentleman. I believe I know.
Supervisor Thomas.
And if you would, give us your name and address and take maybe 3 minutes.
Okay, my name's Chuck.
Pose your question.
Chuck Maniaci. I'm at 3696 Hewlett Road in Okemos. So a couple questions. How many units were there going to be, apartment units? Was it 176?
206.
206. And how many bedrooms? Are they 2-bedroom, 3, yeah?
They're a combination of studio 1 and 2, and 3.
Okay, so, and we had 185 parking spots, right? 90 in one unit?
370.
No, for residents though. You had resident dedicated parking, 90 in one ramp and 95 in the other, I think. Yeah. Okay, all right, anyway, insufficient parking, I believe, based on that, unless you're assuming that half the people will not have a car.
Can I pull
that are
up
renting.
our presentation?
You should have control. Do you have it?
Yep.
It was actually the other one, too.
Set the PowerPoint here.
Yep.
I got it.
You know, the residents guarantee a parking spot. You You know, I just don't see it. Residential private vehicle parking, 95 in one and 90 in the other. Right. All right, so, and then overnight vehicle parking, is that separate from the residential? It must be. So anyway, I just think an assessment needs to be made on the parking. I know I've owned a multi-unit building, and I've got to make sure I provide parking for all my tenants. I've got 3-bedroom units, and you know, on occasion, I've had one group that had 3 cars, and I had to deal with it. So I think we will have an issue there. The other is on the financing that you indicated it's paid back over 19 years or something. You said there was something. Is it like, was that the tax increment financing? You get a little benefit each year? Okay, so it's not cut in half essentially, because next year it's worth 95%, the year after 90. So on average, it's probably about a 25% instead of a 50% reduction. So maybe a $2.5 million versus 5. And then looking at I've done investment business cases for global investments. I know we want to make business cases close, and we do use current rates. You've indicated it's a pain point. I think everyone does. Anyone's looking to finance anything large. Is there any plus, since there's a lot of investment being made by the public and our tax dollars, if you were to refinance, let's say rates get back down to where they were 3 years ago, that the tax increment financing could be offset, so the public gets a little bit of that back for the benefit that's made. Is there any thought behind that? Has there been any?
Okay, I think the only people capable of answering this are the developers, and so
Yeah.
I would ask.
Yeah, that's the last one.
That's the last question. I would ask Mr.
Okay.
Hauser to address that.
Sure. I'll try to remember the questions. So let me start with tax increment financing. So tax increment financing, where Mr. Smith was talking about the value of tax increment financing and the TIF that we get, is about half. The reason that is the TIF is discounted when you go to borrow against that. Lenders do not give you the full value of that. The longer the duration of the TIF reimbursement, in this case it's 19 years for the brownfield, and it's around 16 left in the DDA. Was that?
15.
About 15. 15 in the DDA. So the longer the TIF is out there, the lower the amount that we can get, which is called project proceeds. Mm-hmm. Project proceeds are going to be the amount that we get to go against those eligible costs. So where does the rest of the money come from? It comes from equity, comes from cash, or we have to try to borrow against the asset. And in this case, because we're heavily leveraged, that doesn't really happen that often. So projects that have this level of extraordinary cost generally require more equity. So that's where that balance comes from. As far as the parking goes, working closely with the township, this will be something that's addressed with them according to their ordinance, and working through that process. And some of this is shared parking, like the overnight that you see there. It is used by the residents when all those businesses are closed. We had 39,000 square feet, and there was a reference made, I don't know who made the reference about the commercial and downsizing it to 10,000. It is nowhere near that. We are 30,000, a little north of 30,000 square feet that's left in there. And so the parking that is sized for the public parking, this is in the parking structure. In addition, we have all the on-street parking. So you have, except for Okemos Road, there is parking on the surrounding streets as well that are not included in these parking counts. So hopefully I've answered those questions. Oh, and as far as the township getting dollars back toward the costs and the money that we're getting through the TIF, the only reason we're getting money through our TIF is because of the taxes that are paid by this development only. No other person's or company's property taxes are being levied, just these 2 city blocks. And it's to go to public infrastructure and the environmental, and we'd happily not have those costs. So we need every penny we can get and won't give that back because we got to pay ourselves back somehow. Mm-hmm. So.
At this point, is there anyone else on this row, this first row, who would like to ask a question? Then we'll go to the row behind them. Anyone? I know your name, but please come. That's right. Please come to the.
Okay.
to the podium and though I know you,
I know.
please give us your name and address.
Okay. Vance Paquette, 2226 Kent Street, Okemos. And I usually have a speech all made up, so if I mess up a few times, understand that I'm not totally prepared for all this. And it's kind of off the cuff here. And if I say anything that offends anybody, I sort of apologize, I guess, but I'm just calling it the way I see it. And I'll have a question in a minute, but first, over the year, I've never been all that impressed with the environmental cleanup that they've talked about with this project. That gas station and that cleaners haven't operated in over 20 years, at least. And I don't know why, and all of a sudden, if they get a project, maybe they'll clean it up. But if they don't, apparently it would stay there. So who cares about the residents in the area, I guess. And even then, I'm not expert in environmental, but the blooms, I think, basically pound a pipe into the ground and let it vent. So that's on that. And my basic question would be, what real benefit is this going to be to the average township resident? They talk about jobs. Yeah, well, that's not a big issue today. I saw the post office was hiring people. And they talk about businesses that would be there, but you look at a lot of the other mixed-use operations, the retail space just sits empty for the most part. And they talk about all the financing. Well, it's hard to keep up on that, all the twists and turns, but basically I see a lot of public money going into a private operation. And I'm not sure it would ever, given all the increments and grants and tax incentives and depreciation and tax losses, I don't know if they'd ever really pay any taxes when you consider the federal and state levels. So I guess my question would be, what is it going to do for the average township resident? And I did find trustees' comments rather interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone who would like to address the comments? And I'm on the second row, on the right. Anyone else? How about the back row? Starting at this end, Ms. Page, I believe, behind the mask.
Hi, Lynn Page, 3912 Raleigh Drive in Okemos. I just wanted to also offer a resident's perspective. I am kind of dismayed that the project is going to take probably more than 10 years to finish, from 2017 to now 2027, and I imagine that that may be delayed as well. It's unfortunate that the finances and COVID-19 impact it, but I think I wonder if the resources being put into the elevation are impacting the developer's capability of actually breaking ground in the village. The village itself, the reason it appealed to me as a resident was that it was a comprehensive plan for the 4 blocks, and initially, the plan that was presented to residents had almost double the commercial space, and it had shorter buildings and underground parking. And now through the modification process, it has evolved from 4 blocks to 2 blocks, and now it is 2 multi-story apartment buildings and above-ground multi-story parking structures. And that's very urban. That's not a residence concept of a village. I think the parking plan does seem insufficient in allowing residents to park their cars on the streets, really impacts the rest of the community's access to parking and to traveling or walking those streets, both by cars and non-motorized vehicles. I'm concerned about how that really is going to benefit our primarily single-family residential community. I worry about the impact of those very dense, according to the developers, multifamily projects and the traffic that is imposed on the nearby residential neighborhoods. And I appreciate all the work that's gone into it, both at the township level and at the developers level. But just from what I'm hearing now, I don't think there's a viable plan for the whole property, all 4 blocks of it. And I'm concerned that it's just going to continue to be vacant land, and probably what it has turned out to be is a project that would have been more appropriate at the Meridian Mall. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I get a couple clarifications?
There's
no question in there, but a couple clarifications. So the development was never 4 blocks. It has always been 2 blocks with a second phase, which would have been what we call Block 3. That was where the Douglas J. project is currently. So what you see here, blocks 1 and 2, and then block 3. There was originally a partnership that was being put together with Douglas J. Douglas J was going to be an anchor tenant on block 2 at this corner. And then once blocks 1 and 2 were redeveloped, then block 3 over here would have been freed up for development. Unfortunately, COVID has changed the business plan for Douglas J. And as a result, they are no longer a partner in the project. So that block, which was never Pat Smith's block under the Village of Okemos, was then removed from a conceived project. The other 2 blocks that are across the street were never a part of this project. They're not owned by Patrick Smith, and he's not have any ownership in those properties at all. As far as the building height and the underground parking, the underground parking was originally conceived in the earlier development. 2 things. The extensiveness of the contamination. This part of the block is hazardous contamination. That goes out at a very extremely high rate for trucking and disposal. There's only 2 facilities that are licensed that can take that in the immediate proximity at over $350 a ton versus around $55 a ton for non-hazardous soil. So we would have had millions of extra dollars just related to the underground to be able to build that underground parking structure, plus the extraordinary cost of underground parking. And then as far as the building height, we have removed 1 floor in this plan, so it is not as dense as it was originally. It is actually less dense, so I just wanted that clarification.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else along the background on this side? All right. Oh, okay, I'll go across that way. You can be next. Yes. In the back. In the back in the black. And then I'll come forward.
My name is Tom Stanko. I live at 1975 Navajo Trail in Okemos. And I'm also the chair of the DDA for Meridian Township. And so it's been a couple years since I've seen you. I think about the time I joined the DDA, you guys came in, so it's great to see you again. Appreciate everyone traveling from out of state to be here. I think a long overdue update on where we're at, and there's a lot of numbers. It gets confusing, the numbers change, and so I think I appreciate the consolidated, discussion and the summary. I would just say, just to comment about, our downtown. When I think of downtown, I do think of a little bit more of a dense development, urban development. While the community has grown around it, historic use of those properties have been commercial, viewed industrial. I think of development and I think of a more urban landscape. And so I'll just leave the comments of that. I look forward to more of a community dialogue and an update, and I think this is just really healthy for our community. So thank you.
Thank you. So I think Mr. Potter will be next on the next row.
Yeah, I'm Tim Potter, 4632 Van Atta Road in Okemos. I really feel like the developer has got a good plan in terms of the car parking, motor vehicle parking, since it's right in the heart of the community. And also considering the fact that a lot of people are working remotely now, younger folks in general. So I think a lot of young urban professionals now are not going to be driving motor vehicles as much. And, we'll be expecting to be able to walk and bike more to their destinations. And that, I think, goes for people in the surrounding community there, the neighborhoods in that area. So I'd like to say that if anything, and I know the township, I believe, has been speaking or considering reducing some of the required car parking in the code, which I'm happy to hear about, because we look at the Meridian Mall and some other properties that used to have to build a lot of car parking to meet our code, and it sits unused 360 days of the year. So anyway, I'd just like to point that out as something that I would actually like to see the development in the streetscapes around it be even more bikeable and walkable, to be a nicer destination for people to bike and walk to. So thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Barbara O'Kelly, 2576 Wood Hill Drive. I'm concerned with drainage and with the flooding in our neighborhood. And so I appreciated you mentioning the pocket park, and I would appreciate more information on whether that is going to slow the flow of runoff into the Red Cedar, because the Red Cedar flows into our development when we have flooding.
Thank you. Mr. Hauser.
Good question.
Hauser.
Yep, that's a very good question. That is the thing that we are working on currently. We are working very closely with the Ingham County Drain Office to make sure that our plans will not impact the Red Cedar River. So that's first and foremost the priority of the Drain Office, and they will not sign off on our plans until we have met that requirement. So we're in the middle of that activity right now. We're a few weeks away, I think, from getting a more definitive response. We meet with them about bi-weekly, I believe. John Peckham works with me very closely on this, is addressing that with the Drain Office. Our engineers, Kebs Engineering, is working with us and helping us through all of that. So that is a big concern, to make sure that there's no long-term impact, and anything that happens will not be from this project, because it'll be built right and it'll be built with the approvals of the Ingham County Drain Office. So.
Excuse me, Mr. Hauser. Would you speak to, I believe there was a question about a pocket?
Yeah, in fact, so depending on how it works out with the design, with the Drain Office, we had taken it upon ourselves to acquire this property. If you can follow my cursor here. This property has been purchased. Part of the stormwater management plan is to build a pond that would be located here, which would hold water for a period of time. So I don't have the details on that. They have not been worked out yet. That is something that has to be flushed out, so to speak, before it gets flushed out into the Red Cedar River. So we're working through that. So right in that immediate area, though, depending on how that design is done, we want to do a pocket park and work with the DDA, work with the township, and make that an amenity. Since we have all that river frontage, that would be an opportunity. We have included those costs actually in our numbers, and we have an allowance essentially for that to build that as a part of our stormwater management.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
You might mention the fact there's no curbs on any of those streets.
Yeah.
Now, and the rebuilding, the reconstruction of those
Yeah.
public streets are going to make a significant difference.
Yeah.
You want to get up and talk, Mr. Peckham?
I'm not sure you want me to.
No, that's okay. I can explain it. So he makes a good point. So currently there are no curbs in the village. Okay, what does that mean? Basically, there's no capture that is immediately done off of these areas. So the runoff is basically able to flush off of these sites, off of these streets, relatively uncontrolled. So by building a new stormwater management system that is going to be on all of these streets, that will continue through Block 3 and then down here to where the green area is, the land where my pointer is. So that's going to help control the flow and control the rate of the stormwater. It's going to capture that.
Would you come to the,
I'm rehabbing with a bad name, I'm sorry.
okay.
Repeat her.
From your,
If I repeat her question,
Webster, 2433 South Wild West.
it's Karen Webster.
okay.
Just a question about the space that you referred to for the park.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a little yellow house on that property?
Yes.
There is.
Floods all the time in the
Yep.
spring.
Yep.
So are you creating a pond out of the floodwaters?
So, yeah, so there's two different flushes, and I don't want to get into all the technical details. So there's.
Mr. Hauser, would you first repeat the question?
I will sure do that. So she was talking about a yellow house that is located right here, and it routinely floods in this area, yes. So interestingly enough, and if everybody knows, there is floodplain and floodway. This property here where Douglas J is, the reason it's built elevated and there's only parking down here is because of what she's stating. That also includes the properties that are down along here. So that is taken into consideration as a part of the stormwater management plan. So there's different types of flows, there's regular rainfall, there's certain types of events that are actually measured, and there's different rates that are controlled that you have to retain that water. And then there is the 100-year flood. We can't stop that. And then that's where the water just flows over all of this, and everybody's seen that happen, not only here, but on Grand River and other areas on Okemos Road and elsewhere. So that's all being considered to make sure that it's managed. We have to be outside that 100-year flood event. That's a different completely event that we can't design for. Now, our properties are not in the floodway or floodplain. So that's the good thing about our project, is they're not in there.
I just was wondering about the investment in that property, if it's gonna continue to flood, which happens every spring.
Yeah.
Lansing's a floodplain.
Yep.
Basically, but it happens every spring. I mean, and I know with the new systems that you're putting in place, you're saying that won't impact the newer green space that you're creating?
So that investment was done purposely for the stormwater management. So that house may or may not remain, and we're not sure yet. So depending on how much land we need in order to address the stormwater needs on that site, that's yet to be seen. So the investment that was made by Patrick Smith here was to deal with the stormwater.
Thank you very much.
If I might ask, can you talk about the impacts of that structure on protection of the river itself?
The stormwater?
The management of the runoff, et cetera.
So
in this
sediment, yes.
location.
Yes, so sediments, anytime you have a stormwater management system, whether it is retained on site, open ponds and so forth, the sediment that is tied up in the liquid when it flows actually settles out into those areas. So what it does is it protects the river. And the water that is discharged is relatively free. It's not totally free, but relatively free of sediment, which you don't want sediment loading. So that's a main thing. The other thing is your first couple of inches generally has contaminants. So we have to address the capture of the first few inches in a rainfall event, because that's what comes off of the roads. That would be, anything from cars, asphalt, those kinds of things. So that is the reason for this very careful look. This is a state requirement as well, not just the Ingham County Drain Office. So this will be signed off by Eagle once we get the Drain Office's support on the design, and once it's blessed by the state, then that's our final approval. We're fairly engineered, almost 100% what we call CDs or construction docs. The one thing that we're finalizing right now is the stormwater.
Yes, Mr. Potter.
Just have one more quick question.
Some of the community has been asking about, whether or not Block 2 could get some makeover, just a temporary makeover to make it look better. So, maybe that turned it into a little bit of a park feel or something. And I think some of the comments that it looks blighted might go away, in the interim between now and when construction starts.
And I have to answer all these questions. Okay. Sorry, I'm the only one coming up. So let me show you another drawing here. Let me use this drawing. So originally we had a green space that was around the property. So the township, we were working with the EDC board, the DDA. That was one of the things they want us to do, is to kind of green it at the street front. We did do that. Unfortunately, in our friendly participation in order to get the bridge built, that pretty much got wiped out when they were staging and storing all their materials here and running around. So that green space is no longer really present. Second thing is, as far as doing it over the entire property, a couple things. One, we have a very dense, engineered, compacted stone. And the way it was put here was to basically move the water from this location, shed it, away from the contaminated zones, so that we weren't flooding the area and allowing infiltration. So in putting that there, we would have to bring in a lot of topsoil. It is at grade right now, and then to green it and then maintain it. So, with our plan of starting here in spring, summer of '24, it really would be best if we don't touch this area and try to disturb that area where you saw that earlier plume of the contamination. So we're trying to avoid this situation from getting worse. There was a comment that was made about the contaminants here. We didn't create this contamination. This is something that we inherited. And we're not liable for the contamination, but what we do need to do is make it safe for human health and the environment. And one of our obligations is to make sure that the people that walk on this property, that go to this property, so that's why we put that dense barrier there to do that separation. So it would be very difficult for grass to grow with what we have underneath, because the water has nowhere to go through that.
I just ask one quick question about contamination. Those entities who contributed to that over the past 100 years, historically, have they ever been held,
Yep.
tasked,
Good question.
and paid to the fines by the township? Or, we're going way, way, way back. I'm not familiar with that.
Sure. So the question.
Yes, please.
Okay. I'm learning how to handle this. So the question was, what about the polluters? I'll change your words a little bit, but the polluters that created this contamination, what about them? Have they been held accountable? Have they paid? So the both of these releases from, I'm going to say over here, this gasoline release, this corner is very historical. There is no collectible, viable entity that's associated with that corner there. This party that is there was, to a certain extent, collectible, the dry cleaner. The state of Michigan has collected what they can from them. This was way before we got involved with this project. So when we approached the state of Michigan, they had appropriated funds, about $750,000, to address the source, and it was because of their ability to have obtained some amount of money from that prior polluter. So this is now left to us to manage all of the residual soils. So all the soils that we remove have to go to a landfill. These buildings, when we talk about extraordinary costs, one of the added environmental things that we were unaware of until we did all the studies was we have to put vapor mitigation systems on these buildings to make sure that they're safe for occupancy. And this is common on a lot of buildings in downtowns. This is a common practice today where these things have to be put on when you have contamination like this. So we're addressing the soils. We're making sure that we don't exacerbate the contamination by spreading it. And that's a very delicate thing. Stormwater management and making sure we don't flush the stormwater into the subsurface is very critical. That's made our stormwater management system even more complex because we cannot flush anything into the groundwater.
What about ACE?
Let's give someone else an opportunity to ask questions. Yes, Ms. Vancouver.
Hi, Joyce Vancouvering, 5882 Okemos Road. I think my question might be addressed to Amber Clark and to the developer. Can you explain what the MUPUD has been modified several times? And I'm most curious about how much retail is left. And then also the application to Representative Slotkin, if I read it correctly, said that it will be affordable housing in part of it. So I want to know how much the rent is.
Amber and I can kind of tag
Okay,
that. How's that?
cool.
We'll go bounce them. Do you want to start or you want me to start?
You can go ahead.
Okay. So it is what we call workforce housing. So when we mean, affordable is not a wrong term, but a lot of folks think affordable means to less than 80% of what we call area median income. So these units are targeting workforce, that is people that make a certain wage between 80 and 120% of the area median income. So those particular rents are controlled and managed through MISTA, Michigan State Housing and Development Authority, and they publish every spring, they publish numbers associated with that. As far as the rents, I'm pretty sure I had a sheet here. Oh, there it is. So these rents actually meet those target rents, as they're often referred to. So our studios are somewhere around about $1,400 a unit. Our one bedrooms, one baths are about $1,600 a month. Our two bedroom, two bath are about $2,000. And we have a few threes with three baths. We only have 4 of those, and those do not qualify, but those are at $3,700. So if you were to look at the workforce rates, you would see that we're in those kind of that range. As far as the MUPUD, maybe it's Tim that can address that. How's that?
Hi, I'm Tim Schmidt. I'm the Community Planning Development Director. I wasn't absolutely not hiding back there.
We will let Mr. Schmidt.
Anticipation of meeting me tonight.
We will allow Mr. Schmidt to answer that question.
So the project predates me, and so it was approved originally in 2019. There was an amendment done in 21 just before I started. There was an amendment submitted just after I started, I think the week after I started. And then we approved an amendment, a minor amendment late last year. So fundamentally, Ms. Vancouver, where this has ended up is 206 dwelling units, which I think we talked about, 4-story buildings, which has been pretty consistent all along. At one point it was 5 stories, but it did dial back to 4 stories. There's some sort of rooftop patio in one spot and like architectural features, but not anything substantive on a 5th floor. There was at one point underground parking, and then there was surface parking, then there was a ramp, and then there was surface parking, and now we're back to a ramp, which is, consistent with what I think financially makes the most sense for the site. And then lastly, the question in terms of where we're at with commercial space, at the most recent drawing, there's 26,399 square feet of commercial space on the site, and as I mentioned, 206 residential dwelling units. So it's gone through a number of different changes over the years, which is not, I would say, in my experience, not odd for a project for this complexity. It's just, I think the unique thing here was that we changed our MUPD process kind of midstream too, so there was a lot of moving parts. But I'm happy to answer any specific questions about where we stand in that process if people are interested in that.
And I want to address a little bit more about rental rates. So, studio apartment, 1,400. There's a lot of shaking heads in this room. Benson Hills is a development. It's an old apartment complex in Hazlet. It's been around since the later 70s and 80s. It is the 3rd highest rental rate for apartments in the township. The first is Elevation, and of course, it's one of our newest multifamily housing developments, so you would expect the rental rates to be a little bit more of a modern state. We do have a white paper between the planning and economic development departments about housing and housing rates. The rental rate for Hazlet, for me specifically, was the reason why my husband and I chose to buy our house, because we ended up getting to the point where our rent was a mortgage. So it is at that kind of critical economic situation. And I think for those that may have bought a house maybe 20 years ago and are kind of out of that cycle of life, it's a little bit hard to understand or be able to figure out how a single person or 2 people would be able to afford that, but that is common. And it does fit into the 80% AMI, which is about $76,000 for a couple of people.
Okay. Mr. Walsh.
So my time only goes back 10 years here. I'm Frank Walsh. I'm the township manager for those of you that we have not met. Back 10 years ago, there was a brownfield plan for $365,000 for the old Travelers Club for Douglas J. We were talking about whether or not people went out and put contaminants in there to create a brownfield. Do you remember that, Mr. Weaver? Yeah, right here in this room. So we've come a long way. No one's more frustrated than the staff and the board. We've been through a lot with this development, and we see other developments that have taken off and done extremely well. This one's been stalled. Their frustration's really high. We've probably have spent 30 to 50 meetings with the developers over the course of the last 5 years. But I want to talk a little bit about patience. And I think that's what no one likes to drive by it. By the way, Kelly Jones is here from the county roads, and I want to thank you for getting people frustrated about the bridge. It looks great, and thank you for getting that done. So appreciate that. We needed patience then too. But we all need to dip in and have a little bit more patience with this project, and it is very frustrating, don't get me wrong, and our elected officials who have really, no other development has had this kind of public support in the history of Meridian Township. So the frustration is high, but I don't want to become Petoskey. Does anyone know about the Petoskey hole? Well, if you don't, maybe Google it tonight if you want a little entertainment before you go to bed. It was awful. It lasted for, I think, a couple decades. And it was a disagreement between the city of Petoskey and the developers who walked away from the project because of the frustration. You can Google it on your own, read about it. And that hole in the downtown was enormous, and it impacted the community for a long time. No one's to blame in this situation that we're in. We're all very frustrated, but we all need to just exert as much patience as we possibly can and not let us become what happened in Petoskey. I go back to a comment that I heard probably 20 or 25 years ago. I was the young city manager back in the 90s, back in St. Joseph down on Lake Michigan, next to Benton Harbor. St. Joe and Benton Harbor are very different communities. Both have their strong points. But I remember the CEO of Whirlpool, because Whirlpool is St. Joe, Benton Harbor. Without Whirlpool, it'd be like losing Michigan State, the state of Michigan, and Okemos schools and Hazlet schools if Whirlpool left Benton Harbor, St. Joe. And I was with the CEO one day, and you hear things in life that kind of stick with you. He was in his 60s, very successful running this company, had just taken it to a global level. And I was 31 or 32 years old trying to learn. And I remember something that stuck with me. And somebody smart-mouthed off and said, "Mr. Whitwam, why do you do so much in Benton Harbor and so little everywhere else?" And if you know the situation in Benton Harbor, it's a community of need. And he looked at them very seriously and said, "If not us, who?" And I thought about that, and I thought, that's a really good answer. If Whirlpool doesn't step in and help Benton Harbor like they have for a couple decades, who? And I translate that to this development. If not them, who? They're the ones who have $13 or $15 million, and we don't. We don't have a dime in the property. We just have a high frustration level, which is understandable. But they have all the resources in the property. And if not them, who? Who are we going to become if they do? It doesn't end up working out. So I would just suggest tonight that we clearly understand all the frustration, and let's look at the, what do they say, past performance is a great indicator of the future, past history is a great indicator of future performance. And let's look what this development team has done down at the elevation. And by the way, the rents are way north of $2,000, and there's a waiting list. It's been a really great development for the township. It's brought a lot of really great people into the community who are supporting the businesses down there. And what's happened to that area since the elevations come in, Joe's on Jolly, the Holiday Inn, and so on. But my word tonight is patience. That's what I keep telling myself, as frustrated as I am. And I've had some very direct conversations with them. And I know the board has too. But I'm going to keep digging deep and looking for more patience and hoping we can work this thing out. I don't want to see a big hole. I want to see us work it out. And I know everyone in this room does too. And if not them, who? Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further comments, I would just like to add, thank you all for coming, for helping us all get closer to the same page about what is happening in downtown Okemos. I hope you all leave with the impression that the community considers themselves vested as much as the developers in the success of this project. And that is what we want the most. And we hope that this opportunity to share information and to update us on the circumstances has brought us all to a better understanding and maybe more patience, as Mr. Walsh suggested. So I would thank you all for being here, and we are adjourned.